So I want to welcome you back to Q&A number 4 here in the Project Management Blueprint Facebook group. Today's question comes from Jillian, and Jillian asks a two-part question. The first part of that question is how to avoid cost overruns on my project. And without knowing the specific context of Jillian's past projects and what happened, what was done, what wasn't done, the answer to that really comes down to the 8 pillars of project management that I mentioned in Q&A number 2. And if you haven't saw or looked at and watched Q&A number 2, I suggest that you go and take a look at it there, but I'll do a quick recap of what those 8 pillars of project management are. You have number 1, scope; number 2, time; number 3, cost; number 4, quality; number 5, resources. That's your labor contractor doing the actual work. Number 6 is communication, which was the subject of Q&A number 2. Number 7 is procurement, the ordering of materials and finishes. And number 8 is risk. So for Jillian's question here, how to avoid cost overruns on your project, it all starts with the planning process and how diligent you are in a number of different ways. And this will be covered in the course materials. But you really need to focus in on your scope, your schedule, and your budget. The scope of work really is the key to any project. It all starts with the scope of work. What the scope of work is basically a project grocery list of all of the different tasks that you need to have completed on your project to get to the end result, the desired outcome. And the more accurate that you can make your scope of work, the more complete you can make your scope of work, the more accurate the pricing you're going to receive from the various trades, whether that's from a general contractor that you're hiring to do a cradle to grave renovation for you, do everything from start to finish, or if you want to piecemeal out the work to a variety of different subcontractors, plumbers, HVAC techs, electricians, carpenters, tilers, other flooring installers. So everything really starts from the scope of work and how complete the scope of work is. So as I said, it's like a project grocery list. So if you think of it in the sense of you're buying groceries for a meal that you're going to prepare in the evening or that night for your family, there's a specific recipe that you're going to make. It's maybe your family's favorite recipe, just as an example. You know that you need this ingredient, that ingredient, the other ingredient. You need this much of that. And some of that you might already have in your pantry, but other ingredients you might not. So you have to actually go to the grocery store. So you're going to write yourself a list. You're going to take that to the grocery store. You're going to go there and you buy everything that you need to make that recipe. You come home, you make it that night, and your family enjoys a nice home-cooked meal. On the opposite end, if you don't know what you're going to make, you don't have a plan, and you go grocery shopping, you're just going to pick up whatever you feel like or whatever might be on sale. And it's going to be kind of a jumbled mess, and you're going to come home and you're going to start making something. Maybe you forget a certain ingredient to go with the recipe that you're planning to make, and you have to go back to the grocery store, and there's another trip, another cost that was unplanned. So really, the scope of work is the stem of everything that's on your project. And from the scope of work, you can put together both a schedule and a budget to work off of. So in saying that, going back to the example about the recipe, the scope of work does 3 things. It gives you and the contractor clear direction on the work that needs to be done at your property for that renovation or rehab. It eliminates any confusion, any misunderstanding. In the project management world, we call these scope gaps. Scope gaps and scope creep, which basically means that there's something that's missing inside of the scope of work that actually needs to be done, but no one has accounted for. And that could, or has accounted for twice, where there might be some cross overlap between some trades. So here, another example would be a common one is bathroom exhaust fans. Who's responsible for supplying and installing the fan? It could be the general contractor responsible for supplying and installing the bathroom fan, and the electrician is responsible for providing the power and the final connections to that bathroom exhaust fan. Or I've seen it where the electrician is the one that also purchases the exhaust fan, installs it, does the electrical connection, but the general contractor then has to do the duct work through the exterior wall. And so it's kind of that's what you want to avoid in these scenarios, is that scope gap and the overlap between different trades doing different work. Now, obviously, if you're hiring a general contractor, then that falls into their realm, and they need to include for it all. If it's on your scope of work, it's not on your scope of work, that's a problem. The other part of that is scope creep. So if you want to avoid cost overrun, providing a detailed scope of work, and I guess I would add on to that drawings, accurate drawings and specifications to your project, which really rounds out the scope element, the first main pillar of project management. That will encompass all the details that need to happen on your project. And what scope creep is anything that gets added on after the fact that was missed after the initial scope of work was created. So an example of that would be if you were to open up a wall during demolition and find that there's something you weren't expecting, whether it's a structural post, structural elements and components that were tampered with that need to be corrected, plumbing line that's leaking, mold, mildew, rot, things like that. That would be kind of added scope creep, unexpected scope. Another portion of that would be you as the owner adding additional scope onto the project that wasn't originally part of the initial plan. So if you wanted to change it from a laminate countertop in the kitchen to a quartz or granite countertop, that would be an additional cost that would be considered scope creep. If you were just doing a kitchen remodel and you said, okay, let's do you're here already to the contractor, let's also do a bathroom remodel, that would be an additional cost. That would be scope creep because it's not part of the initial or the original scope of work or drawings or specifications that were created. I would say another part of avoiding cost overruns, we covered the first is the main one, is really nailing down and getting clear on the scope of work that's required, providing accurate detail for contractors to be able to price appropriately to make sure that you're getting everything included in the price. And the important thing is that falls on you as the project champion, the leader and manager of your renovation, the investor, and doing so protecting your downside risk by providing as much detailed information to a contractor for pricing as possible, rather than leaving it in their hands to figure out what is required on the project. Now, obviously, we're not all as well versed in the world of construction, and that's what your power team members are for, to fall back onto, or other investors in your network who've completed similar projects. It might be worth getting them to consult with you on what they've done in the past, or myself as a coach. And you call it in the mainstream commercial construction world as a third-party project manager, to assist you to fill in the missing pieces that you might not necessarily be experienced in, so that way that your project runs more smoothly and gets off to the right start. So that's the scope of work is the main element that you really need to hone in on and nail down. The other part is your budget. So what I talk about in my book is the importance of competitive pricing. And you want to get at least 3 to 5 bids for every single project that you're doing. Doesn't matter whether that's 3 to 5 plumbers, 3 to 5 electricians, 3 to 5 carpenters, 3 to 5 general contractors. Doesn't matter. You want competitive pricing to see what the lay of the land is. And if you can get competitive pricing based on having complete, detailed, comprehensive scope of work, good drawings, permit drawings, and knowing what finishes and materials that you want to buy, you're going to get extremely accurate pricing. And then you can compare different contractors' quotes, what they've included for, excluded for, and that will be part of the course materials as well. But from that, you'll have a number to work with and a variance. And what I would recommend is that whatever the cost you receive or the quotes that you receive from contractors, is that you add a contingency on top of that of at least 10% for the unforeseen. and that will really help those overruns and what would be unexpected costs. So that kind of goes from how to avoid cost overruns to how to and prevent cost overruns as much as humanly possible. And that stems into risk, part of the 8 pillars, as well as scope, time, and cost. And yeah, so you really want to hone in on that budget and make sure that it's realistic, have a proper contingency in place. That way, things do happen and things do go wrong on a project, but at least you have something, and you don't need to tell the contractor that you have something set aside, a 10% contingency, but you should know that you have this sum of money set aside just for the unexpected that might creep up, and that would fall into either scope gaps or scope creeps. Just to revisit what those mean, scope gaps would be anything that you missed during the quoting, receiving contractor quotes that wasn't in the scope of work, wasn't in the drawings, wasn't in the specifications. And then scope creep would be anything that gets added on after you hire a contractor. That could be unexpected costs or costs or extras that you want to have added to them. So that should answer the first question here on how to avoid cost overruns in the first place. It really comes down to planning your project and being as diligent and detailed before you get contractor quotes and having everything set up in place so that those quotes come in as complete and accurate as possible, and then you go from there. The other part of Julian's question is, if there are cost overruns, how do you determine if the extra cost should be borne by me as the client or by the contractor? And that goes back to the scope of work as well as what's on the contractor's quote. So if you give a contractor detailed and complete comprehensive scope of work that says this is everything on my grocery list, my project grocery list that I need done, and here's who's going to do it, if you're going to be hiring subcontractors, so there's no misunderstandings, miscommunications, confusion as to who's doing what, then you know that you should be covered there. But the other part is what's in the contractor's actual quote, what's in their pricing. Have they noted any specific exclusions that they're not doing? Have they said that they're not including to do any of the trenching for underground services? If you're doing water line upgrades or doing hydro upgrades that require trenching or adding a second gas meter, a third gas meter to your property for multiple units. So you really need to hone in on what the contractors have in their specific quote as far as inclusions and exclusions. And you can, by getting competitive bids, 3 to 5 specifically, you can compare each contractor's quote and see, are they noting anything that's included or excluded that the others aren't, and question it. And that's how you help minimize, again, the scope gaps between the different contractors' pricing. So scope gaps can be used interchangeably from either what's included and not included in scope, or confusion between different trades as to who's doing what work, or and when looking at trade pricing and trade quotes, contractor quotes, who's included and who's not included, specific things that you either want or don't want. It applies both ways. Now, the kind of second part of that question is, if there are cost overruns, how do I determine if extra cost should be borne by me, the client, or the contractor? Is what's in the contract, what is documented in writing that says I'm responsible as the owner and the client for this, or you're responsible as the contractor for that. What I teach is that you want everything documented in writing. This is the processes that I learned from my years doing commercial construction, working on projects that are in the millions of dollars. You can't make mistakes, or if you make mistakes, they need to be very minute mistakes, because it could really screw you over if you make a big one in the name of, well, in that case, in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. We're dealing with, in a lot of instances, probably smaller scale projects, but still every dollar and cent matters when it comes to your return on investment. So I understand that. So you really need to put in writing the scope of work. This should all be included as addenda to your contract. What's in the scope of work? What's in the specifications as far as the materials that are to be supplied, the finishes to be supplied by the contractors or general contractor? what's the start and end date, and if a contractor goes beyond the agreed to end date, also called substantial completion date, then what happens as far as the project costs. And I mentioned this in Q&A number 3 about performance bonus and delay penalties and how all that works. So you go back and have a listen to that. But really determining for cost overruns whose responsibility it is, you have to look at, okay, what do I have documented in writing? What was included and excluded on the contractor's quote? Is this a cost that's unexpected or unforeseen that is being added on to the original contract value? Because that's what the contingency I recommended having is meant to protect you on. And then is it just that the contractor missed something, wasn't communicating properly with you at the time of quoting? So that's why the quote bid review, bid leveling process is extremely important. I'll go into more of that in the actual course. But really, without getting specific information as to the nature of the situation, those are kind of the varying degrees of what I would say is potentially possible when you have cost overruns and how to determine whose responsibility it is. If it was on the scope of work and you told the contractor that you wanted it included in your quote and it's not noted as an exclusion on their quote, then it's their responsibility to eat the cost. If it wasn't on the scope of work and it wasn't noted, or it wasn't noted on the quote, or if it was specifically excluded on their quote, then that's a cost that you will have to bear. And this is part of the reason why I want to teach in real estate investors and even homeowners the importance of planning and those 8 pillars of project management, so you can avoid these kinds of situations as much as possible and protect yourself, protect your downside risk, like any investment, because the more effort, the time and effort that you put into the planning process should pay dividends on the actual execution of the project. Now, no matter how well you plan a project, things are still going to go wrong, and you have to know how to take control of the situation and adapt and act accordingly. That's why the contingency for budgets, for example, is so important. So I guess in saying all of that, what I would recommend is, if you have any specific context as to situations where you, and not just Jillian, but anyone here in the group, has encountered a situation where you've had cost overruns on your project and the specific nature of where those cost overruns stemmed from, and where you had to eat the cost or the contractor had to eat the cost, I would encourage you to leave them down below in the comments section so I can take a look at them and hopefully provide some additional insight to you for that specific case that everyone here in the group can learn from. So I hope you enjoyed this Q&A number 4. Jillian, thank you very much for your questions here about cost overruns. Really appreciate everyone who's submitting their questions in. I hope you learned something here, and I look forward to answering the next one. So have a great day.